The year was 1816, a time when England's countryside still clung tightly to age-old traditions, yet found itself on the cusp of profound social and scientific transformation. Amid this shifting landscape, a singularly unsettling event unfolded, one that would ripple through the collective consciousness of a small village, and eventually intrigue historians and folklorists alike for centuries to come. The story begins with a family whose name has been lost to the passage of time, but whose fate was recorded in whispered conversations and the fragile pages of local parish records. It was said that this family, after succumbing to death within the span of a few days, was discovered in a state that defied all natural law. They had shared a meal together, not in the vibrant communion of life, but in the cold and silent realm beyond it. This chilling account, recounted by those who claim to have witnessed or heard of the event, stands as a haunting enigma, an eerie tableau that challenges the boundaries between life and death. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to never miss a new video. And tell me, where are you watching this video from? I love seeing all different people come together for these stories. In the early 19th century, England was a land deeply entwined with notions of mortality and the afterlife. The Napoleonic Wars had recently drawn to a close, leaving behind scars both visible and invisible. Communities were grappling with loss on a massive scale, and the rituals surrounding death were steeped in a mixture of religious solemnity and superstition. It was within this milieu that the family's bizarre post-mortem gathering was first reported, an incident that would unsettle even the most devout parishioners and superstitious villagers. The narrative opens on an ordinary evening in the village, where the family, known among neighbors for their close-knit bonds and shared meals, had retreated to their modest cottage. The household was characterized by its warmth and unity, the kind of place where laughter and conversation flowed as freely as the ale at the local tavern. Their nightly dinners were not merely a ritual of sustenance, but a reaffirmation of kinship and security amid the uncertainties of rural life. Yet, tragedy struck swiftly and without warning. Within a matter of days, the entire family succumbed to an unknown affliction. Some contemporary accounts speculate it may have been a sudden outbreak of a contagious disease or a fatal accident, though no definitive cause was ever documented. The villagers, already wary of the harshness of life, were left stunned by the sudden silence that descended upon the once lively home. What followed was a sequence of events so bizarre that it bordered on the supernatural. Shortly after the family had been laid to rest in the village churchyard, reports began to circulate of strange noises emerging from the freshly turned earth. Sounds described as faint clinking, murmurs, and the unsettling impression of movement beneath the soil. These reports, initially dismissed as the product of fevered imaginations or nocturnal animals, soon gained traction as more villagers claimed to witness inexplicable phenomena. Driven by fear and curiosity, a group of local men resolved to investigate. Armed with lanterns and a mixture of skepticism and dread, they gathered at the gravesite under the cloak of night. What they allegedly found defied all comprehension. The family's graves appeared disturbed, the soil freshly overturned, and, most disturbingly, the bodies were said to be arranged as if seated around a table, posed in the act of sharing a meal. This macabre scene, part tableau vivant, part nightmare, was described in hushed tones as a gathering of the dead continuing their earthly habits beyond the veil. Eyewitness testimonies, recorded in various forms over subsequent weeks, painted an unsettling picture. The bodies, though cold and lifeless, seemed unnaturally positioned to mimic the conviviality of a shared dinner. Plates and utensils, if present, were described as eerily clean and arranged with deliberate care. The faces of the deceased, according to some accounts, bore expressions that were difficult to interpret. Some said they appeared serene. Others claimed a frozen grimace of terror. The villagers who witnessed this scene were left overwhelmed, caught between revulsion and fascination. This post-mortem gathering struck a chord deep within the community's fears and beliefs. It challenged the finality of death and suggested the possibility of lingering consciousness or restless spirits. The event quickly became a subject of whispered speculation, with some attributing it to divine punishment or demonic interference, while others sought more earthly explanations. The notion that the dead might engage in such a familiar act as breaking bread together struck a nerve, blurring the lines between the living and the dead in ways that unsettled the village's collective psyche. The physical environment around the gravesite added further layers to the mystery. Witnesses described an unexplainable warmth that seemed to emanate from the earth, defying the chill of the early summer nights. A faint aroma of food, roast meats and fresh bread, was reported lingering in the air, though no source could be found. Soil disturbances suggested recent activity beneath the surface, yet no evidence of grave robbery or animal interference was ever discovered. These phenomena deepened the sense of unease, suggesting that whatever force animated this gathering was neither wholly natural nor easily dismissed. Local clergy found themselves at the center of the storm, struggling to provide both spiritual guidance and explanations. Sermons took on a darker tone as ministers sought to reassure their congregations, framing the event as a test of faith or a warning from the divine. Rituals were performed anew at the gravesite, blessings, prayers, and the sprinkling of holy water, in hopes of quelling the restless spirits and restoring peace. Yet, the persistence of strange occurrences suggested that these efforts were met with limited success. Meanwhile, the villagers grappled with their own reactions, caught between superstition and the dawning influence of Enlightenment thinking. Some turned to folk remedies and charms to protect themselves, while others advocated for more practical measures, such as stronger burial protocols or closer watch over the graveyard. The incident stirred a palpable tension between tradition and emerging rationalism, reflecting broader societal shifts in attitudes toward death and the supernatural. Though official records from the time are sparse, the event was documented in various local diaries, parish notes, and early newspaper snippets that survived the passage of time. These fragmented accounts, often contradictory and colored by personal beliefs, nevertheless preserve the core narrative of a family defying death's finality by sharing a meal beyond the grave. The story seeped into local folklore, becoming a cautionary tale whispered to children and recounted at firesides, a haunting reminder of mortality's mysteries. In the grander scope of history, this episode stands as a compelling intersection of cultural beliefs, fear, and the human desire to find meaning in the face of inexplicable phenomena. It captures a moment when the past's shadows stretched long into the present, and where everyday life was irrevocably touched by an event that transcended ordinary understanding. The family who ate together after death remains a spectral presence in the annals of English folklore, embodying the unsettling question: what truly lies beyond the final breath? To fully comprehend the unsettling account of a family sharing a meal beyond death, one must delve into the historical and cultural tapestry of early 19th century England, a period marked by profound transformation and lingering superstition. The year 1816 fell in the immediate aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, a time when the nation wrestled with both the scars of conflict and the rapid changes reshaping its social fabric. This context provides essential insight into the beliefs, fears, and customs that framed the villagers' perception of the inexplicable event that would soon haunt their collective memory. England in the early 1800s was a land caught between epochs. The Industrial Revolution was gathering momentum, altering landscapes, economies, and ways of life. Yet rural communities like the one where this family lived remained deeply rooted in traditions that had endured for centuries. The countryside was a mosaic of customs, folklore, and religious observances, where the boundaries between the natural and supernatural were often blurred. Death, in particular, occupied a central place in the cultural consciousness, its rituals both a comfort and a source of profound anxiety. The Napoleonic Wars, concluding in 1815 with the Battle of Waterloo, had left England grappling with loss on an unprecedented scale. Thousands of soldiers had perished, and the collective grief permeated civilian life. Funerary customs, already elaborate, became imbued with heightened significance as communities sought to honor the dead and confront the fragility of existence. Mourning attire, memorial services, and burial practices evolved to reflect a society intensely aware of mortality. Yet, despite these formalities, scientific understanding of death and decomposition remained rudimentary, leaving space for fear and speculation about what happened to the soul and body after passing. In this milieu, the Church wielded significant influence, shaping public attitudes toward death and the afterlife. The Anglican faith, dominant in rural England, taught doctrines of resurrection and eternal life, yet popular beliefs often incorporated elements of older folk traditions. Tales of ghosts, spirits, and restless souls were commonplace, and the idea that the dead might linger in some form was woven into local lore. The villagers' reaction to the family's post-mortem gathering was thus deeply informed by these intertwined religious and cultural narratives. Funeral customs of the era were both practical and symbolic, reflecting a delicate balance between reverence and apprehension. Bodies were typically prepared by family members or local undertakers, washed and dressed in their finest clothes before being laid out in the home for a wake. This intimate setting allowed loved ones to bid farewell, often with prayers and hymns. Burial took place soon after, usually in consecrated ground near the parish church. However, the lack of advanced preservation methods meant that decomposition began quickly, often unnoticed until the gravesite was disturbed. The understanding of what transpired in the interval between death and burial was limited, and fears of premature burial were widespread. Cases of catalepsy, where individuals appeared dead but retained some bodily functions, were often misunderstood, fueling anxiety that the living might be interred alive. This fear was not merely theoretical. It inspired the creation of safety coffins, equipped with bells or flags to signal the buried person's distress. Such concerns reflect the era's tenuous grasp of medical science and the deep-rooted dread of death's unknowns. It was also a period when the scientific method was beginning to challenge superstition, yet these advancements had not fully permeated rural life. Natural philosophers and early medical practitioners sought to explain phenomena previously attributed to spirits or divine intervention through observation and experimentation. Nonetheless, many villagers remained skeptical or fearful of these new ideas, clinging instead to traditional explanations that provided a semblance of control over an unpredictable world. Within this framework, the peculiar case of the family who seemingly dined after death would have been especially disconcerting. The event confronted villagers with a tableau that defied both religious teachings and emerging scientific thought. It suggested a liminal space where the dead retained agency, where the normal order was upended, and where the sacred boundaries between life and death blurred perilously. The timing of the incident also intersected with shifting attitudes toward burial practices. The overcrowding of churchyards had become a growing concern, with some communities beginning to advocate for reforms such as deeper graves or the establishment of new cemeteries outside village limits. These changes were motivated by public health considerations, as well as a desire to respect the dead properly. Yet, in many rural areas, old customs prevailed, and the sanctity of consecrated ground was paramount. Any disturbance or anomaly within a graveyard was taken as a serious affront to both the living and the divine order. Moreover, the cultural fascination with death extended beyond solemn rituals into the realm of the macabre. Mourning jewelry, post-mortem photography, which would emerge in later decades, and stories of hauntings reflected a society grappling with loss in varied and complex ways. The villagers' response to the family's posthumous meal must be understood within this context of both reverence and morbid curiosity. The intersection of these historical and cultural factors helps explain why the event resonated so deeply with the community. It was not merely an oddity, but a profound challenge to the worldview that governed their lives. The villagers' reports of strange noises, the inexplicable warmth around the graves, and the eerie tableau of the family sharing a meal were interpreted through lenses shaped by religious doctrine, folk belief, and the nascent stirrings of scientific inquiry. This tension between tradition and progress, faith and reason, is emblematic of the broader societal currents of the time. The event became a focal point where anxieties about death, the afterlife, and the limits of human understanding converged. It exposed the fragile nature of the boundary between the living and the dead, a boundary that the villagers were only beginning to comprehend in new ways. In essence, the story of the family who ate together after death cannot be divorced from its historical and cultural setting. It is a narrative deeply embedded in the fears, hopes, and beliefs of early 19th century England, a period marked by upheaval, transformation, and the enduring mystery of mortality. Understanding this backdrop is crucial to appreciating the full weight of the phenomenon and the reactions it provoked among those who lived through it. In the quiet village where this extraordinary event unfolded, the family at its center was known not merely as a unit of kinship, but as the heart of a small, tightly woven community. Their daily existence was marked by routines and rituals that embodied the rhythms of rural life, and their shared meals were a cornerstone of both familial unity and social cohesion. To understand the profound shock that rippled through the village after their deaths, one must first glimpse the fabric of their lives before tragedy struck. The household comprised a father and mother, along with their 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, whose ages spanned from early childhood to adolescence. The parents, modest farmers, embodied the virtues of diligence and piety, their days tethered to the cycles of planting, tending, and harvesting that sustained their livelihood. Neighbors recalled the family as industrious and kind, their door always open to a wayfarer or neighbor in need, embodying the spirit of mutual aid that characterized rural England. Central to the family's identity was their practice of coming together each evening to share a meal, a ritual that transcended nourishment to affirm bonds of love and solidarity. These dinners were occasions of storytelling, laughter, and the exchange of news, anchoring the family amidst the uncertainties of their world. The table, often laden with simple fare, fresh bread, vegetables from their garden, and occasionally small game, was a sacred space where the day's labors gave way to communal warmth. The children, each with distinct temperaments, contributed to the household's dynamic in ways that endeared them to villagers. The eldest son, a boy of 15, was known for his quiet resolve and willingness to assist neighbors with odd jobs. The middle child, a lively girl of 12, possessed a keen curiosity and a fondness for local tales, while the youngest, scarcely 7, brought a playful innocence that softened the hardships of rural toil. Together, they formed a portrait of familial harmony, a microcosm of village life itself. Yet this idyllic picture would soon be shattered by a sudden calamity, the nature of which remains obscured by the mists of time. Contemporary accounts are sparse and often contradictory, but what emerges is a narrative of rapid and simultaneous demise. Within the span of a few days, the entire family was struck down by an unknown cause. Some suggest a swift-acting illness, possibly a virulent fever or poisoning, while others speculate an accident or exposure to toxic substances in the environment. The suddenness of their deaths sent shockwaves through the community. The family's cottage, once a hub of activity and warmth, was transformed into a silent monument to loss. Neighbors spoke of the eerie quiet that descended upon the house, a silence so profound it seemed to press against the walls themselves. The village, used to the comforting sounds of daily life, found itself confronting the stark void left behind. Preparations for the funeral were made with a mixture of grief and apprehension. The local priest, well acquainted with the family's steadfast faith, officiated over the rites that would send the departed to their final resting place in the churchyard. The village gathered to pay respects, their faces etched with sorrow and, for some, a creeping unease born of the inexplicable circumstances surrounding the deaths. The closeness of the family, so vividly expressed in their shared meals and mutual support, added a layer of poignancy to the tragedy. It was not merely the loss of individuals, but the dissolution of a small constellation of relationships that had defined the village social fabric. The sudden absence of the family's presence was felt keenly, a reminder of life's fragility in a world governed by unpredictable forces. In the immediate aftermath, the villagers attempted to make sense of the calamity through the lens of their beliefs and experiences. Some viewed the event as divine punishment, a test of faith meant to humble the community. Others whispered of curses or malevolent forces at work, superstitions that had long simmered beneath the surface of rural life. Yet, despite these speculations, no consensus emerged, and the true cause of the family's demise remained a somber mystery. It was against this backdrop of grief and uncertainty that the subsequent, far more disturbing events took shape. The very ground that held the family's bodies became the stage for an occurrence that would haunt the village for years to come. The notion that those who had shared so closely in life might continue their communion in death struck a chord of both fascination and horror. The family's life, once a testament to unity and resilience, thereby became entwined with a narrative that transcended natural explanation. Their story illustrates how ordinary lives, marked by everyday rituals and relationships, can be transformed by tragedy into enduring legends that challenge the understanding of mortality and the human experience. Through this lens, the family's shared meal after death becomes not only an anomaly, but a profound symbol of the ties that bind us beyond the limits of flesh and time. In the days following the burial of the family, a veil of unease settled over the village, thickening with each passing night. What began as subtle murmurs soon escalated into reports of strange disturbances near the gravesite that defied all conventional understanding. These accounts, initially whispered with incredulity, soon took on a weight of their own, becoming a focal point of fear and fascination that gripped the community. Shortly after the burial, villagers began noticing peculiar sounds emanating from the churchyard under the cover of darkness. Descriptions varied, but shared a common thread. Faint noises reminiscent of clinking utensils, low murmurs, and, most disturbingly, the rhythmic cadence of voices or laughter. These sounds were unlike the common rustling of nocturnal animals or the creaking of ancient trees. They bore an uncanny resemblance to the familiar ambiance of a family meal, an echo of life persisting beyond the grave. At first, the villagers dismissed these reports as products of overactive imaginations or the tricks of moonlight and shadow. Yet, as more individuals independently attested to hearing these eerie noises, disbelief gave way to apprehension. Some claimed that even by day, the earth around the gravesite seemed unsettled, with patches of soil appearing freshly disturbed, despite the absence of any visible cause. These manifestations defied the natural order and unsettled the collective psyche. Driven by a mixture of dread and curiosity, a small group of village men resolved to investigate further, armed with lanterns and a resolve tempered by fear. They approached the gravesite on a moonless night, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. What they encountered was nothing short of baffling. The soil appeared freshly turned, as if the graves had been recently disturbed, yet there was no sign of animal activity or human interference. The most astonishing discovery awaited them upon closer inspection. According to multiple eyewitness accounts recorded in local diaries and oral histories, the bodies of the family had shifted within their resting places and were found arranged in a manner evocative of a communal meal. The corpses were said to be positioned around an invisible table, their limbs bent as though holding utensils, their heads inclined toward one another in an unnatural semblance of conversation. This grotesque tableau challenged the very essence of death's finality. Villagers who glimpsed the scene described it with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The bodies, though cold and devoid of life, seemed to retain an eerie semblance of animation, as if frozen mid-gesture in a macabre reenactment of their last shared moments. Plates and bowls, if present, were said to be arranged with an unsettling precision, as though the dead continued the ritual of dining beyond the boundaries of mortality. Such a vision blurred the lines between the natural and supernatural, leaving witnesses grappling with emotions ranging from revulsion to a profound sense of the uncanny. This revelation sent shockwaves through the community, amplifying existing fears and superstitions. The notion that the dead could convene post-mortem in such a familiar, yet impossible way, unsettled the villagers' understanding of death and the afterlife. The event was interpreted through various lenses. Some saw it as a manifestation of restless spirits unwilling to depart, others as a portent or curse, and a few as evidence of divine or demonic intervention. The phenomenon was not confined to the physical arrangement of the bodies. Witnesses reported other unexplained occurrences surrounding the gravesite. A faint but persistent aroma of food, freshly baked bread, roasted meats and herbs, was said to linger in the air, defying all attempts to locate its source. This sensory anomaly added a layer of surrealism to the experience, as if the senses themselves were being deceived or drawn into a spectral reenactment of the family's final meal. Moreover, the atmosphere around the grave was described as peculiarly warm, an anomaly given the cool temperatures typical of the season. This inexplicable heat seemed localized, intensifying during the hours when the noises and apparitions were most frequently reported. Such physical irregularities lent credence to the villagers' belief that something beyond natural explanation was unfolding beneath their feet. Not all in the village were willing to accept these accounts at face value. Some skeptics posited that the disturbances were the result of grave robbers or local pranksters seeking to exploit the community's fears. Others suggested that the phenomena might be explained by natural processes, soil settling, animal activity, or even the sounds of the wind channeled through the surrounding foliage. Yet, the consistency and specificity of the reports, coupled with the profound emotional reactions they elicited, made such dismissals difficult to sustain. The local clergy found themselves thrust into a challenging position. Tasked with shepherding the spiritual welfare of the community, they confronted a mystery that defied both scripture and reason. Their attempts to investigate and address the situation were met with a complex mix of faith, fear, and skepticism among their parishioners. Clergymen conducted prayers and blessings at the gravesite, hoping to pacify any restless spirits and restore sanctity to the ground. But the persistence of the phenomena suggested that their efforts had yet to succeed. In response to the mounting unease, some villagers took it upon themselves to guard the grave at night, forming watch groups to observe and document any occurrences. These vigils yielded further reports of strange lights, shadowy figures, and intermittent noises, deepening the aura of mystery. The graveyard, once a place of solemn rest, became a locus of anxiety and speculation, its boundaries blurred between the living and the dead. The broader community outside the village soon took notice as well. News of the family's post-mortem gathering spread to neighboring parishes and towns, carried by travelers, merchants, and clergy. The story was recounted with varying degrees of embellishment, evolving into a legend that captured imaginations far beyond the village's borders. It became both a cautionary tale and a source of macabre fascination, reflecting society's complex relationship with death and the unknown. In this way, the discovery of the family eating together after death transcended mere anecdote. It became a phenomenon that challenged the boundaries of natural law and social understanding. The villagers' experiences of noises, scents, physical disturbances, and the unsettling tableau of the bodies constituted a profound rupture in their reality. This rupture forced a confrontation with the enigmatic space where life meets death, and the familiar customs of communal meals were transformed into a haunting symbol of mortality's mysteries. As the villagers gathered in hushed clusters, sharing their accounts of the post-mortem scene, the descriptions of the family's meal took on an almost surreal quality, one that blurred the boundaries between the physical and the spectral, the natural and the uncanny. Eyewitnesses painted a hauntingly vivid picture of the bodies arranged not haphazardly, but in deliberate poses evoking the intimacy and ritual of a shared dinner, an image that both fascinated and repelled those who bore witness. The arrangement of the corpses was described with painstaking detail, revealing an unsettling tableau that seemed to mimic the very act of dining. The bodies were positioned as though seated around an invisible table, their limbs bent with unnatural precision to suggest holding cutlery or reaching toward plates. The eldest son's hand was said to rest near where a bowl might have been, fingers curled in a frozen grasp, while the mother's head inclined as if engaged in quiet conversation with her daughter. Even the youngest child appeared poised mid-gesture, as though caught in a moment of innocent participation. Observers noted that the faces of the deceased bore expressions that defied easy interpretation. Some described a serene calmness, an eerie tranquility that belied the unnatural circumstances. Others perceived something more disturbing, a rigidness that suggested frozen terror or a grimace caught in the throes of death. This ambiguity lent the scene a spectral quality, as if the family had been suspended in a liminal space between life and death, trapped in the echoes of their final moments. Crucially, the positioning of the bodies was not random, but appeared to follow the social dynamics of the family's living interactions. The parents occupied places of authority, their postures reflecting central roles in the composition, while the children's placement suggested familial hierarchy and intimacy. This deliberate arrangement suggested a force, whether natural or supernatural, that sought to preserve the familial bonds even beyond death, maintaining the ritual of shared sustenance in a realm beyond human comprehension. The absence or presence of physical objects in this tableau remains a subject of debate and speculation. Some witnesses claim to see plates, bowls, and utensils arranged with eerie precision, though these items were described as oddly pristine, as if untouched by decay or the passage of time. Others reported only the suggestion of such objects, with shadows and shapes conjured by flickering lantern light, giving form to the invisible. This ambiguity deepened the mystery, raising questions about the nature of the phenomenon, whether it was a physical disturbance or an apparition woven from collective fear and memory. Further compounding, the enigma was the state of the corpses themselves. Despite having lain underground for days, the bodies showed signs of preservation that defied expectations. Skin, though pallid, retained a semblance of texture. Joints appeared flexible enough to allow for the posed positions, and no obvious signs of decomposition or disturbance were reported. This contradicts the natural process of decay, which would typically render such postures impossible within such a time frame. Such anomalies fueled speculation about unnatural preservation or otherworldly intervention. The villagers' descriptions often invoked a sense of the uncanny, a phenomenon where something is simultaneously familiar and alien, comforting and terrifying. The family's shared meal was a deeply human act, symbolizing connection, sustenance, and love. Yet to witness it enacted by the dead transformed it into a grotesque parody, a haunting echo that unsettled the community's grasp on reality. This duality resonated powerfully, challenging the villagers to reconcile their affection for the family with the horror of their posthumous gathering. The scene was further complicated by reports of the family's bodies exhibiting subtle movements or changes over time. Some witnesses claimed that positions shifted slightly between observations, as if the tableau was not static, but alive in some spectral manner. Others spoke of fleeting glances, or the impression of eyes following their gaze, phenomena that blurred the line between corpse and apparition. These unsettling details intensified the aura of fear and mystery surrounding the gravesite. In response to these observations, the villagers grappled with competing interpretations. Some viewed the gathering as proof of the persistence of the soul or spirit after death, a tangible manifestation of the family's bond and unfinished business. Others feared it as a manifestation of evil, a curse or demonic presence that profaned the sacred ground and threatened the living. Religious authorities echoed these concerns, interpreting the event within theological frameworks that emphasized spiritual unrest and the need for ritual intervention. The villagers' attempts to explain the phenomenon through the lens of natural processes were met with skepticism, given the specificity and consistency of the reports. The idea that post-mortem muscle contractions or gases could produce such deliberate and socially coherent arrangements stretched the limits of contemporary medical understanding. Yet, in an era when science was only beginning to probe the mysteries of death and decomposition, such explanations remained tentative and incomplete. The macabre tableau became a locus of communal anxiety and fascination. It was a physical and symbolic rupture in the village's understanding of death, one that invited reflection on mortality, memory, and the ties that bind families beyond the temporal sphere. The family's meal after death was neither merely a spectacle nor a simple haunting. It was a profound challenge to the finality of death, and an unsettling reminder of the mysteries that lie at the threshold of human experience. This tableau also served as a catalyst for communal action and debate. The villagers, torn between fear and reverence, sought ways to address the phenomenon, whether through spiritual rites, protective measures, or appeals to external authorities. The image of the family sharing a meal beyond death became a symbol of both hope and dread, a narrative that transcended individual grief to touch on universal questions about life, death, and what may lie beyond. In this way, the post-mortem gathering was more than an anomaly. It was a profound expression of human connection, disrupted yet enduring, a haunting reminder that the rituals of daily life, like sharing a meal, hold meaning that may transcend even death itself. The villagers' accounts, etched into local memory and folklore, preserve this moment where the boundaries between worlds blurred, leaving behind a story as unsettling as it is poignant. Surrounding the eerie tableau of the family's post-mortem gathering were a host of physical and environmental anomalies that compounded the mystery and unsettled the villagers' sense of reality. These peculiar signs, observed repeatedly by those who dared approach the gravesite, defied natural explanation and deepened the sense that something extraordinary, and perhaps malevolent, was at work beneath the surface. One of the most frequently reported phenomena was an inexplicable warmth emanating from the earth itself. On nights when the village air was crisp and cool, the soil above the family's grave was described as unseasonably warm to the touch. This warmth was localized and persistent, defying the natural cooling of the ground after burial. Villagers who knelt or placed their hands upon the earth spoke of a subtle heat, neither burning nor discomforting, but undeniably present. This anomaly challenged common understanding, as freshly turned soil typically retained coldness, especially during the early summer months when the incident occurred. Accompanying this warmth was a faint but persistent aroma that lingered around the gravesite, permeating the air with the unmistakable scent of food. Witnesses described aromas reminiscent of freshly baked bread, roasted meats, and aromatic herbs, scents that seemed incongruous with the surroundings, and yet were unmistakably real to their senses. Attempts to locate the source of these odors proved futile. No fires, cooking utensils, or foodstuffs were found nearby. This olfactory phenomenon added an unsettling sensory dimension, as if the very essence of the family's last meal had been conjured into the atmosphere, suspended between the realms of the living and the dead. Further physical disturbances were noted in the soil itself. The gravesite showed signs of repeated upheaval. Patches of earth appeared freshly turned or disturbed despite the absence of any visible cause. Footprints, whether human or animal, were notably absent, deepening the enigma. The soil's texture and composition seemed altered, as if the ground had been restless, shifting subtly but persistently. Such signs suggested an active force beneath the surface, one that resisted explanation rooted in natural processes. Adding to these anomalies were reports of strange visual phenomena. Some villagers claimed to have seen faint, flickering lights hovering near the grave at night, small orbs or glimmers that moved erratically, sometimes coalescing into shapes reminiscent of figures seated around a table. These lights were described as ethereal and transient, vanishing upon closer approach, but leaving an indelible impression on those who witnessed them. Such manifestations fueled speculation about spectral presences or otherworldly activity connected to the family's restless gathering. The atmosphere around the grave was thick with a palpable tension, a sense of urgency and unrest that seemed to pulse with the earth's warmth and the lingering scents. Villagers attuned to the land's subtle energies spoke of an oppressive heaviness, a weight that pressed upon the chest and quickened the heartbeat. This intangible pressure underscored the physical anomalies, creating an environment charged with a mixture of fear and reverence. In response to these phenomena, the community sought explanations within the dual realms of faith and emerging science. The clergy interpreted the warmth and scents as signs of spiritual unrest, manifestations of souls tethered to the mortal plane by unfinished business or divine judgment. They advocated for renewed prayers, blessings, and rituals aimed at pacifying the spirits and restoring sanctity to the ground. These rites, carried out with solemnity and hope, sought to quell the disturbances and bring peace to the family's souls. From a more empirical perspective, some early natural philosophers and medical practitioners pondered whether these anomalies could be related to biological or chemical processes. The decomposition of organic matter is known to produce heat through microbial activity, a phenomenon called thermogenesis, although the scale and persistence described in this case exceeded typical observations. Likewise, the release of gases during decay can emit odors, yet the specific scents of cooked food reported by witnesses were difficult to reconcile with such explanations. Soil disturbances were also examined through the lens of natural phenomena. Burrowing animals, earthworms, and subsidence can alter soil texture and appearance, but the absence of tracks or other signs challenged these theories. The possibility of seismic activity was considered but dismissed due to lack of corroborating evidence in the region. The flickering lights and sensory impressions resisted categorization, straddling the boundary between physical phenomena and psychological experience. This interplay between physical signs and sensory perceptions underscored the complexity of the village's ordeal. The anomalies were not isolated or fleeting, but multifaceted and persistent, involving tactile, olfactory, and visual elements that engaged multiple senses simultaneously. Such a convergence heightened the emotional impact and lent the experience a surreal quality that defied simple explanation. The villagers' reactions to these anomalies varied. Some were paralyzed by fear, avoiding the graveyard altogether and warning others to keep their distance. Others were drawn to the site, compelled by curiosity, faith, or a desire to uncover the truth. Community leaders grappled with how best to address the situation, balancing respect for tradition with the need to protect the living from what many perceived as a supernatural threat. The physical and environmental anomalies surrounding the family's grave ultimately became inseparable from the narrative of their post-mortem gathering. They served as tangible manifestations of the boundary between life and death, between the known and the unknowable. Each warmth felt, each scent inhaled, each flicker of light witnessed reinforced the villagers' conviction that something extraordinary had transpired, a phenomenon that challenged the limits of contemporary understanding and plunged a simple rural community into a profound confrontation with the mysteries of mortality. The unsettling phenomena surrounding the family's gravesite soon permeated the fabric of village life, stirring a deep and pervasive unease among the townsfolk and their spiritual leaders alike. Fear and superstition intertwined with faith, giving rise to a complex tapestry of reactions that reflected the era's struggle to reconcile traditional beliefs with the inexplicable events unfolding before them. The local clergy, custodians of both spiritual guidance and community order, found themselves at the epicenter of the storm. Confronted with reports of the family's post-mortem gathering and the accompanying physical anomalies, they endeavored to interpret these occurrences through the lens of religious doctrine. For them, the manifestations were not mere curiosities, but signs of spiritual unrest, manifestations of souls caught between this world and the next, or perhaps omens of divine displeasure. Sermons delivered in the village church took on an urgent and somber tone, emphasizing themes of repentance, the afterlife, and the importance of maintaining spiritual vigilance. The clergy exhorted parishioners to strengthen their faith and to participate in communal prayers aimed at pacifying any restless spirits. These gatherings became as much a source of solace as a means of addressing the supernatural threat perceived to loom over the community. The church also organized specific rites at the gravesite, including the sprinkling of holy water, the recitation of psalms, and the blessing of the earth. These rituals sought to sanctify the ground anew, to sever any lingering ties that bound the deceased to the realm of the living, and to restore the sanctity of the burial site. The priests performed these ceremonies with solemnity, aware that their spiritual authority was being tested by forces beyond their usual purview. However, the clergy's efforts were met with a spectrum of responses from the villagers. Many embraced the rituals with fervor, finding in them a measure of comfort amid the growing dread. For these parishioners, the rites represented a tangible means of confronting the unknown, reaffirming the power of faith over fear. They participated in processions to the churchyard, communal prayers, and acts of penance, hoping to avert further disturbances. Yet others reacted with skepticism or outright resistance. Some villagers questioned whether mere prayers and blessings could truly address the phenomena, suspecting that more practical or even drastic measures might be necessary. A minority harbored fears that the clergy's interventions might be provoking the very forces they sought to quell, interpreting the events as signs that the spiritual balance had been irrevocably disturbed. Complicating matters was the persistence and intensity of the supernatural manifestations. Despite repeated rituals, reports of strange noises, scents, and spectral lights continued unabated. This resilience challenged the clergy's authority and the community's faith, fostering a sense of helplessness and despair. Some parishioners began to wonder whether the family's souls were doomed to unrest, trapped in a liminal state by circumstances beyond human control. The villagers' responses extended beyond spiritual matters into practical concerns. Fear permeated daily life, with some avoiding the churchyard altogether, while others took to escorting family members or livestock past the site quickly and with prayers on their lips. Local leaders discussed the possibility of exhumation or relocation of the bodies, though such actions were fraught with religious, ethical, and social implications. The tension between superstition and emerging rationalism also played out within the village. While many adhered to traditional beliefs, some individuals, often younger or more educated, sought explanations grounded in natural philosophy or medicine. These voices, cautious and measured, urged a tempered approach that combined spiritual observance with empirical investigation. Their perspectives, however, were often marginalized amid the prevailing atmosphere of fear. Beyond the village, the clergy corresponded with higher ecclesiastical authorities, seeking guidance on how best to address the crisis. Letters and reports conveyed the gravity of the situation, describing phenomena that defied canonical understanding. In some cases, external church officials dispatched envoys or recommended particular rites, including exorcisms or the consecration of new burial grounds, to restore order. The situation also drew the attention of itinerant preachers and folk healers who offered alternative spiritual interventions. Their presence introduced additional layers of complexity, as their methods sometimes clashed with orthodox practices, appealing to segments of the population hungry for relief, but wary of established authority. These figures contributed to a dynamic interplay of faith, fear, and folk belief that characterized the village's response. Within households, the events sparked private rituals and protective measures. Families sought to shield themselves through the use of charms, prayers, and symbolic gestures intended to ward off malevolent influences. These acts, though personal and varied, reflected a communal desire to assert control over an unsettling and seemingly uncontrollable situation. The clergy and community leaders grappled with the challenge of maintaining social cohesion amid the rising tensions. The phenomena threatened not only spiritual well-being, but also the everyday functioning of village life. Markets, gatherings, and work routines were disrupted by fear and suspicion, underscoring how deeply the supernatural episode had permeated the social fabric. Throughout this period, the interplay between faith and fear, ritual and reality, defined the village's struggle to come to terms with the uncanny events. The clergy's responses, situated at the crossroads of religious authority and communal leadership, illustrate the complexities inherent in confronting phenomena that transcend conventional understanding. Their efforts to reconcile doctrine with experience reveal a society negotiating the fragile boundary between the sacred and the profane. In this way, the village's reaction to the family's post-mortem gathering and the surrounding disturbances encapsulates the broader tensions of early 19th century England, a world caught between enduring traditions and the dawning forces of change. The spiritual and communal responses to the event illuminate how faith, fear, and the need for meaning converge when confronted with the profound mysteries of death and the unknown. As the unsettling events surrounding the family's post-mortem gathering continued to grip the village, the boundaries between superstition and emerging scientific inquiry began to blur. The local clergy and villagers, though steeped in religious tradition and folklore, found themselves confronted by forces that demanded explanation beyond prayer and ritual. This precarious balance ushered in a cautious wave of scientific and medical interest, marking an early intersection between nascent empirical investigation and deeply rooted cultural beliefs. The stirrings of inquiry were led by itinerant medical practitioners and natural philosophers who had begun to apply observational methods to phenomena previously relegated to the realm of superstition. These individuals, often self-taught or trained in distant towns, brought a rationalist perspective to the inexplicable, seeking natural causes for the disturbing events at the gravesite. Their involvement introduced a new dimension to the village's ordeal, one that challenged both the authority of the clergy and the prevailing narratives of supernatural causation. Medical professionals of the time, though limited by the era's embryonic understanding of pathology and decomposition, offered theories grounded in observable physical processes. One prevailing hypothesis posited that the family had been victims of premature burial, a fear common in the 19th century due to the difficulty of accurately determining death. Cases of catalepsy or deep coma could mimic death, leading to the interment of individuals who were in fact still alive, but incapacitated. Muscle contractions occurring after burial might thus produce movements or postures interpreted as deliberate gestures, explaining the unsettling arrangement of bodies. Another theory focused on the natural phenomena associated with decomposition. Early forensic observers noted that gases produced by the breakdown of organic matter can cause limb movements, facial distortions, and sounds such as groans or clicks. This led to the suggestion that the noises reported near the graves and the apparent meal posture could result from these involuntary spasms rather than supernatural agency. These explanations aim to demystify the events and reassure a fearful public, though they often fail to account for all observed details, such as the warmth and food-like scents. Natural philosophers extended the inquiry to environmental factors. Soil composition, temperature fluctuations, and microbial activity were considered as possible contributors to the anomalies. Some speculated that chemical reactions in the earth might produce heat or odors, while others conjectured that certain atmospheric conditions could create auditory illusions or optical effects, such as the flickering lights reported by witnesses. These efforts represented an early attempt to apply systematic observation and reason to phenomena that had long been the province of folklore. Despite these emerging theories, the medical and scientific community faced significant challenges in convincing the villagers and clergy. The limitations of contemporary knowledge, coupled with the deeply ingrained cultural and religious frameworks, meant that rational explanations were often met with skepticism or outright rejection. For many, the supernatural remained the more plausible and comforting interpretation, providing a narrative that aligned with their beliefs and experiences. The tension between scientific inquiry and superstition was further complicated by the social dynamics within the village. Those advocating for empirical investigation often occupied marginalized positions, their voices overshadowed by the dominant religious authorities and the collective fears of the populace. Yet, their presence marked a subtle but significant shift in the way unexplained phenomena were approached, laying groundwork for future advances in forensic science and pathology. In documenting the case, some early medical practitioners took meticulous notes, recording the sequence of events, physical observations, and community reactions. These records, though fragmentary and sometimes contradictory, constitute some of the earliest attempts to systematically study post-mortem phenomena outside the controlled environment of hospitals or laboratories. Their work reflects an evolving understanding of death, decomposition, and the interplay between physical processes and human perception. The interplay between superstition and science also influenced burial practices. Awareness of premature burial fears and decomposition effects spurred discussions on improving mortuary protocols, including longer observation periods before interment, better methods of confirming death, and innovations such as safety coffins equipped with signaling devices. While these measures were in their infancy, the case of the family who ate together after death contributed to the urgency of reform. This period also witnessed broader philosophical debates about the nature of death and the boundaries of human understanding. The unsettling events challenged the prevailing dichotomy between body and soul, material and immaterial, prompting reflection on whether death was an absolute cessation or a threshold to other forms of existence. These questions permeated not only scientific circles, but also literature, theology, and popular culture, highlighting the profound impact of the family's case beyond its immediate locality. In the village itself, the introduction of scientific perspectives did not resolve the mystery, but added layers of complexity. Some villagers found reassurance in natural explanations, while others clung more tightly to spiritual interpretations. The coexistence of these viewpoints created a dynamic and sometimes fraught discourse, reflecting the broader societal tensions of an era straddling tradition and modernity. The engagement of medical and scientific minds with the case also attracted attention from neighboring regions, sparking dialogues among scholars, physicians, and clergy about the implications of such phenomena. Correspondence and reports circulated beyond the village, contributing to emerging fields of forensic investigation and the study of post-mortem changes. The family's story thus transcended its immediate context, becoming a touchstone for early explorations into the mysteries of death. In sum, The scientific and medical inquiry into the family's post-mortem gathering represents a pivotal moment in the gradual shift from superstition to empirical understanding. Though constrained by the limits of contemporary knowledge, these investigations exemplify humanity's enduring quest to illuminate the unknown. They stand as a testament to the tension and interplay between faith and reason that continue to shape our engagement with life's most profound mysteries. The extraordinary events surrounding the family, who appeared to share a meal after death, did not fade quietly into obscurity. Rather, they left an indelible mark on the village's collective memory and reverberated through broader societal channels. Over time, the incident was meticulously chronicled across various media: local newspapers, personal diaries, parish registers, and early forensic journals, transforming it into a cautionary tale that transcended its immediate context and influenced evolving mortuary practices. In the immediate aftermath, local newspapers seized upon the story, presenting it with a blend of sensationalism and solemnity. These accounts, though often tinged with the biases and limitations of the period's journalism, captured the public's imagination and disseminated the tale beyond the village confines. Headlines evoked both fascination and fear, framing the family's post-mortem gathering as a mysterious occurrence that challenged established understandings of death. Personal diaries and letters from villagers and visitors alike provide a more intimate window into the community's experience. These writings reveal a spectrum of emotional responses: grief, bewilderment, dread, and in some cases, a resolute determination to seek explanations. Such first-hand accounts offer nuanced perspectives that complement the more formalized narratives of the press and clergy, preserving the human dimension of the ordeal. Parish registers and church documents recorded the family's deaths and subsequent events with a level of official detail, reflecting the ecclesiastical authorities' attempts to maintain order and provide spiritual context. Entries note the rites performed, the clergy's interventions, and the community's reactions, serving as valuable historical records that trace the unfolding of the phenomenon within the framework of religious observance. Notably, early forensic journals and medical treatises reference the case as an exemplar of the complexities surrounding death and burial. Physicians and natural philosophers used the incident to illustrate the challenges of distinguishing between life and death, the potential for premature burial, and the physiological processes that follow death. These scholarly discussions contributed to the burgeoning field of forensic medicine, highlighting the interplay between empirical observation and cultural interpretation. The story's circulation in these varied forms ensured its endurance as a cultural and scientific touchstone. It became emblematic of the anxieties surrounding mortality that permeated early 19th century society, embodying fears of death's finality and the unknown territories beyond. The narrative was retold in sermons, folk tales, and later, historical works, each iteration adding layers of interpretation and mythos. Importantly, the incident catalyzed critical reflection on burial practices and mortuary science. The vivid depiction of the family's post-mortem gathering underscored the potential dangers inherent in premature burial and inadequate mortuary protocols. This awareness fueled advocacy for reforms aimed at safeguarding the dead and assuaging the fears of the living. Among these reforms were calls for extended observation periods before burial to ensure the certainty of death, improvements in the training of medical professionals to accurately diagnose death, and innovations in coffin design, including safety mechanisms intended to prevent entombment of the living. While such measures were not universally adopted immediately, the case added momentum to their gradual implementation. The event also influenced the design and management of burial grounds. Concerns about grave disturbances led to stricter regulations regarding the depth and security of graves, as well as the establishment of new cemeteries outside densely populated areas. These changes reflected a growing recognition of public health considerations alongside spiritual and cultural imperatives. Beyond practical reforms, the family's story permeated the cultural consciousness, inspiring artistic and literary explorations of death, the afterlife, and the uncanny. Poets, painters, and storytellers drew upon the narrative's rich symbolism to probe themes of mortality and memory, weaving it into the broader tapestry of Gothic and Romantic sensibilities that characterized the period. The enduring fascination with the case also fostered interdisciplinary inquiry, inviting scholars from theology, anthropology, medicine, and folklore to examine its implications. This cross-pollination of perspectives enriched understanding and underscored the multifaceted nature of human engagement with death. In the village itself, the legacy of the family's post-mortem gathering persisted through generations. Oral traditions preserved the tale, often embellished or adapted, serving as a moral and existential lesson about the boundaries of life and death. The gravesite became a place of whispered reverence and caution, a tangible link to a past that defied closure. This sustained attention ensured that the incident remained more than a localized curiosity. It became a case study in the evolving dialogue between science, religion, and culture. Its documentation across diverse media and disciplines reflects a society grappling with the profound uncertainties of mortality and the desire to impose order upon the mysteries that surround it. Through these records and their ongoing reinterpretation, the story of the family who ate together after death endures as a testament to the complexities of human experience, where fact and folklore intertwine, and where the quest for understanding confronts the limits of knowledge. It stands as a historical mirror, reflecting the fears, hopes, and transformations of an age poised between tradition and modernity. The story of the family who ate together after death has endured far beyond the confines of their quiet English village, morphing into a legend that continues to captivate scholars, folklorists, and forensic experts alike. This tale, preserved through centuries, has become a focal point for modern interpretations that straddle the domains of cultural anthropology, forensic pathology, and psychological phenomena, each lens offering its own insights while deepening the mystery. In folklore, the narrative resonates as a powerful metaphor for the bonds of family and the persistence of communal ties, even beyond the final breath. It embodies the human desire to find continuity in the face of mortality, suggesting that certain rituals, such as sharing a meal, transcend the physical boundaries of life and death. This interpretation situates the story within a broader tradition of ghostly feasts and spectral gatherings that populate the mythic landscapes of many cultures, serving as both cautionary tales and expressions of collective memory. Anthropologists have examined the family's post-mortem meal as a cultural phenomenon reflecting early 19th century attitudes toward death and the afterlife. The event highlights the intersection of ritual, belief, and social cohesion in rural communities confronting loss. It underscores how death rituals function to reinforce identity and provide meaning, even as they reveal underlying anxieties about the unknown. The story's endurance in oral and written traditions points to its role in negotiating the liminal space between existence and oblivion. From a forensic pathology perspective, the case invites scrutiny of the physiological processes that occur after death, processes that, under certain conditions, might produce movements or appearances suggestive of life. Concepts such as the cadaveric spasm, a form of muscle stiffening that occurs immediately upon death, and post-mortem muscle contractions are considered as possible explanations for the body's unnatural positioning. Additionally, the phenomenon of false death, due to catalepsy or deep coma, though rare, offers a medical framework to understand fears of premature burial that the story vividly encapsulates. Psychological interpretations further enrich the discourse, exploring how collective trauma and grief can manifest in shared visions and memory. The community's reports of noises, scents, and apparitions may be understood through the lens of mass psychogenic phenomena, where intense emotional states give rise to sensory experiences that blur subjective and objective realities. This perspective acknowledges the profound impact of loss on human perception and the mind's role in constructing narratives that make sense of the incomprehensible. Modern researchers also consider environmental and forensic factors that might account for some of the reported anomalies. The decomposition process, soil chemistry, and microclimatic conditions can produce heat, odors, and sounds that, when interpreted through a cultural framework steeped in superstition and fear, take on supernatural significance. These scientific insights, while offering naturalistic explanations, do not diminish the story's power, but rather situate it within the complex interplay of biology and belief. The legacy of the family's post-mortem gathering continues to inspire interdisciplinary dialogue, bridging gaps between science and the humanities. It challenges researchers to approach historical phenomena with humility, recognizing the limits of contemporary knowledge and the cultural contexts in which such events are embedded. This openness fosters a nuanced appreciation of how human societies confront death, both as a biological certainty and a profound existential mystery. In popular culture, the tale endures as a source of fascination and creative inspiration. It appears in ghost stories, theatrical productions, and historical fiction, often adapted to reflect contemporary anxieties about mortality and the afterlife. Its enduring presence attests to the universal human engagement with death's enigma and the need to articulate fears and hopes through narrative. The story also serves as a reminder of the progress and challenges in medical and forensic sciences. Advances in understanding death, improved mortuary practices, and innovations in detecting signs of life have significantly reduced the likelihood of premature burial and related tragedies. Yet, the persistence of the tale underscores that the boundaries between life and death remain areas of profound uncertainty and cultural negotiation. Ultimately, the family who ate together after death stands as a testament to the enduring mysteries that surround human existence. Their story transcends a mere historical curiosity. It embodies the tensions between faith and reason, life and death, memory and oblivion. It invites ongoing reflection on the nature of mortality and the ways in which humans seek to find meaning in the face of the unknowable. Their legacy persists not only in records and folklore, but in the collective human imagination, a haunting reminder that, despite centuries of inquiry, death retains its secrets, and the rituals that bind us may echo far beyond the final silence.